getting ready to begin this wonderful program and information sharing session. So let me ask you to, first of all, give yourselves a big hand for being present today and being here. We are very excited about this opportunity to bring much needed information about environmental justice, to speak about this topic, its critical nature in the communities of our city, particularly in marginalized and underprivileged communities. Having this information conversation, as well as placing action on policymakers to give attention to something that impacts and affects all of our communities. Traditionally, in Black and brown, as well as impoverished or marginalized communities of any racial background or any racial hue, this has not been a well talked about, well conversed conversation. This topic is not very well known because there's so many other things we think to worry about that's more important than this, and it all boils down to this one reality and this one fact, and that is your health and your environment impacts every other area of your life. There isn't anything in your life and mine that is not impacted by our health and the environment that we live in. Whether you're speaking about children that are preschoolers or grade schoolers, or whether you're talking about our seniors who are experiencing their retirement years and in the golden senior years of their lives, this issue is of critical importance. And I'm so glad to have this session being convened here today, this Environmental Justice Forum for DeKalb County, connecting people, planet, and the Green New Deal. I'm encouraging you to take out pad and paper and pencil and take notes and learn as much as you can, study and grow and ask questions today if that opportunity is given to you. I want you to walk out of here empowered and encouraged to know that this is a controllable issue that we can take control of if we get our hands on it early enough. All right? We are a church, and I'm going to begin with prayer, but I would certainly invite you to spend a few moments in your faith and prayer tradition, and then I will conclude in mine. Let us all bow our heads together for a moment of silence and then prayer. Father, we know that you have created this world and made it for our use, not for our abuse. The earth is yours and all that is in it. So we pray that you will give us the ability to recognize the sanctity of the earth, the holiness of the air, and our responsibility as stewards over your creation. And I pray that you will give sober and clear thinking to those who enact and make policy that impacts those of us who live and share this planet with our fellow man. I ask you now for gravity, sincerity, integrity, and honesty as we have this discussion and as we place truth in a position where it speaks to power. Protect those that are most vulnerable among us, those that are the weakest. Let them feel your protection, not only in this conversation, but in those actions that take place long after this conversation is done. I pray that you will enable us to open our eyes and ears to hear this topic from new perspectives and deeper insight, and we'll honor you and thank you for it. We ask these blessings in the powerful and blessed name of the Lord Jesus. And everyone here said, amen. Amen. I want to introduce the commissioner for Super District number 6, who is our convener today, who convenes us to have this discussion, who's been on the front lines leading in this space. And we need to have solid champions who understand the needs of people and are willing to bring those needs to the forefront. Please receive Commissioner Ted Terry as he comes to address us this morning.
Harris. All right, can y'all hear me okay? All right, this is an amazing facility. I have been here a few times before, so thank you again Pastor Harris, for opening your doors to us. Appreciate our DeKalb County Television team here. The church multimedia team is live streaming, so folks are watching at home, and we're also recording today as well, so you can share with your friends and family later on. Pastor Harris and the New Life community are in the community. They open their doors every single day of the week for those who are less fortunate, who are on the streets. And one theme that you might hear a lot today, and I hope that you'll take away from, if you take away one thing from this meeting and this discussion this morning, is that when we talk about our planet, we're putting people first. It's about our people and our planet. Those two things are inextricably linked. All right, there's not an abstract ball floating in space and we need to protect it. We are on that. It is us. And I always love that that bumper sticker you see on cars every once in a while. You don't see them as much these days. Think global, act local. And right here in DeKalb County, we have our own challenges, but we have so many of our own opportunities to which we can come together and make a difference. I was talking with Pastor Harris earlier, and one of the programs that they offer and have been offering in recent years in partnership with DeKalb County, our fire rescue department, is opening warming centers. You know, every year we're seeing more individuals on the street who don't have a home, and some nights it gets really, really cold, below freezing. And we want to open up our doors to give them emergency shelter for those who otherwise don't have it. And we did that this last winter, and after this last week, and really these last many years, the need to have cooling centers open in our community is even more important, because one of the top causes of climate-related death in the world is related to heat. Heat stroke, heat exhaustion, dehydration. It's happening all over, including here in Metro Atlanta. And so Pastor Harris and their team, they are in the community. They've opened up their doors many times before to talk about environmental justice issues. And so we're looking forward to the discussion today. And so this year and this summer, we've been really highlighting the need and the opportunity for a lot of our residents who are having trouble paying their power bill. And one of the programs that my office has been working on over the last 4 years now, before I became commissioner, is a weatherization program. So we've been working with nonprofits locally to provide weatherization for homeowners, renters who otherwise wouldn't have thousands of dollars to put into improving the energy efficiency of their homes, which of course is good for reducing our own greenhouse gas emissions, but also reducing their power bill. And I'll share one quick story from an individual. We'll just call her Miss Jenkins in Central South DeKalb. She lived in DeKalb County for 50 years, and her home was built in the 1950s. And she saw the flyer about the weatherization program and the green jobs program, where, you know, hiring folks in DeKalb to do the training, to go in and do these energy efficiency improvements. And she saw the flyer on a church bulletin board and got with some of her neighbors. And there was about 5 neighbors, mostly senior citizens, on one street. And we went down and did all 5 of those homes. They applied, they met the qualifications for income, lower income, fixed income. And Miss Jenkins' home in particular was one of those old homes that didn't have all the insulation in it. And when you walked into her home, the floorboards breathed. There was a draft coming up. And upon further inspection, looking under there, no insulation, no vapor barriers, just like caulking the windows and doors, just sealing the envelope, just these basic things. And she had a window unit, right? So this is one of these old homes that have central heat and air, a window unit. And she would say, you know, when it gets too hot, it doesn't work. It can't just keep running and running. And so just in one day, a team of about 6 trainees, and they were, there's pictures on our website, they're in like those like clean suits, right? They're covered head to toe with like the white suits, everything's taped, and they got the mask on, and they went into her house on a pretty warm day. Underneath it, vapor barriered, insulated, did some patching, about $2,000 worth of work. Kind of like low-hanging fruit of energy efficiency. And they came through, and the next day she said, "This feels like a home." Wasn't drafty, it was staying cool, and we're projecting about $700 annually in energy savings, just for her not having to run the AC extra or the heat. And so, but she didn't have that $2,000. And several of the neighbors and the folks who apply for these programs, they don't have thousands of dollars just to put on something, right? For one day, we'll get some savings. So this was a tangible way. And so what we've been working on, not only energy efficiency, but solar. So we've got Capital Good Fund and Georgia Bright. Y'all may have heard the Biden administration has put out a lot on new solar rebates and tax credits. And some of y'all might be thinking, well, how do I get access to that? Like, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a tax expert, but I might have some good sun on my property, on my roof, and maybe I could do that. And so what we've done is partner with Georgia Bright and Capital Good Fund to hopefully open up that opportunity for the average person below incomes of $100,000 combined. So this is moderate to low income program. Analyze your home, your roof. If solar works for you, they'll give you the actual, all the paperwork and all of the technical stuff that you need to get solar and reduce your power bill. All right. Something you'll be hearing about in the future, village habitat design. Mr. Greg Ramsey, we've been partnering with him and the planning firm Kimley Horn and Farmer D Organics to really reimagine development in DeKalb County. And one of the things, if you talked with Greg, he may have mentioned that we have analyzed all of DeKalb County. And we looked at all the last little bits of undeveloped land, all the developed land, all the parking lots. Answer this quiz here. What percentage of DeKalb County is left undeveloped? 1%. What else? Who else? 2%. 12%. That's very optimistic. It's about 2% is undeveloped. Now, DeKalb County is a big county, so that 2% is thousands of acres. But if we don't act fast and act now with policies that protect our tree canopy, our neighborhood green spaces, the last little bits of forest and trees and conservation areas will be clear-cut, bulldozed, scraped, and you might get a bunch of boxes put up on it. And so we're trying to reimagine and reinvigorate this idea of the village. A village has conservation area, it has intergenerational facilities, it has walking trails, it has access to our environment, as well as affordable, sustainable housing. All right, so someone asked, where is District 6? So as y'all may have realized by looking at the map here, so District 6 is on the left. District 7, which was held by Commissioner Lorraine Cochran Johnson, who of course now is our incoming CEO, was on the right here. So we're kind of like right on the line. I think this is District 7, across the street is District 6. But I overlap with 4 other commissioners in Districts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we do have a vacancy for District 3. And so everyone has 2 commissioners, unless you're in 3 and 7, which unfortunately you do not have any commissioners right now. One of the things we're going to be talking about today is knowing who your commissioners are, who your incoming commissioners are, and talking with them. And let me take a moment here because we did have some elections this last May, and so we have District 4, actually, the incumbent did not run for re-election. We had an election, a runoff, and so we actually are very excited to recognize Ms. Shakira Johnson, who is our incoming District 4 commissioner. And so you can see District 4 is a little purple area, so Clarkston, Stone Mountain, Scottdale, part of Tucker, Pine Lake, big part of county. And Ms. Johnson is an engineer, has experience in water and sewer and all the engineering things you can imagine. So it's going to be really great to get her expertise on the board because a big part of environmental justice is fixing our water and sewer system. because we want to reduce those overflows and flooding in our neighborhoods. One commissioner cannot do it alone. So the themes and the things that you want to see for your community, we always need to be talking to all of our commissioners, and certainly the two that you do have representing yourself. Just if you haven't figured it out yet, the commissioners are the legislative branch. So we have a CEO form of government, the CEO runs the government, the commissioners set the budget, policies, do other activities related to land use and zoning. So there is a bifurcation of power, which means that a board of commissioners cannot do it alone. We need a CEO. And I'm really actually very excited about Commissioner Lorraine Cochran-Johnson, because me and her have been teaming up on environmental issues since I got on the board in 2001. She sponsored the resolution for us to do a solar analysis for all of DeKalb County, which I'm happy to say is about to move forward, and we'll soon be looking at, hopefully, thank you, that deserves a round of applause. That's like millions of dollars of money in taxpayer savings and reduced greenhouse gas emissions. So Lorraine's going to be a great CEO, and we want to work with her to advance a lot of the environmental justice policies that we're talking about today. So Pastor Harris really, I think, captured it. We're going to talk more about it in the panel, but environmental justice is, I believe, one of the most pressing issues in DeKalb County. We see the effects of climate change. All right, we talked about the really cold weather, the really hot weather. One of our neighbors in the audience has had her backyard, the creek has literally eroded away and killed trees and eroded away parts of her own property because of flooding. And some neighborhoods in DeKalb County, the streets turn into riverways when it's a medium rain. So we have a lot of work to do to protect our own neighborhoods from the climate disasters, but to ensure that those who are most vulnerable have a way to mitigate the harm that they've been forced to endure. Let's go and flip the slides all the way to the Environmental Justice Commission, because the one thing that we'll be talking about as a call to action today that I want to get y'all ready for is we need to get more, and this is part of our DeKalb Green New Deal taglines, people powered. All right, so y'all voted. Yeah, we had an election this year. Every 2 years, some commissioners up. That's great, you vote, right? But then what? After you vote, then what? Right? And everyone's like, well, yeah, what do we do next? What do we do? And in a perfect world, this representative democracy, I'll take all your hopes and dreams and all your issues, and I will take them with me to the Board of Commissioners, and we will solve all those problems. But I am only one person, and some of these challenges are so deep and so systemic that it takes more than just one person or one office. It takes an entire community. And so one of the strategies to give the people a seat at the table is to actually create committees and commissions that have power, where ordinary residents can sit at the table on level with the politicians, with the department heads, with the people who are making decisions in this county, and you are there to represent not just your community, your neighbors, but DeKalb County from the standpoint of the average person. And so the Environmental Justice Commission, it's something we've taken inspiration from our state legislators. State Rep Becky Evans is here. Say hi to Becky. Thank you, Becky, for being here, who's been a champion on environmental justice issues. I think Rep Angela Moore is here. Where's Angela? Is she? There he is. Rep Angela Moore in the back there, working on a bill related to consumer protection and fair labeling about lead and products. So our legislators have done a lot on environmental justice at the Capitol, but unfortunately not everyone at the Capitol agrees that environmental justice is an issue. And so we have taken inspiration from their leadership, and we want to create an Environmental Justice Commission right here in DeKalb County. It will be made up of appointments from not just the commissioners and CEO, but community organizations, nonprofits, other experts who not only would come together to talk about the environmental pollution and justice issues in our county, but propose solutions, propose funding. Funding is very key because that's a key part of what commissioners do. We are appropriators. We have to pass the budget. And as our president is so fond of saying, don't tell me what you believe, show me your budget. and then I'll tell you what you believe. And where we put our taxpayer money, where we put our resources is an indication of our community's priorities. And I hope that this Environmental Justice Commission that will give residents power to put forward policies and budget items to monitor the progress of the work that's being done, the consent decree, the audit of the sanitation department, our air pollution monitoring, all of these things should and can have civilian oversight and input into the process. All right, and the one thing that we will talk about later today is the landfill, because we are poised as a Board of Commissioners to vote on an increase in the sanitation rates. So if you get a green bin or a blue bin at your house, you're poised for about a $65, $70 increase in your fees. Now, what do you get for those fees? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today. We're fighting for environmental justice to be part of the equation. Because if all of us, and I'm paying it too, are going to be paying more money into the sanitation fund, we want to get better services out of it, right? That's number one, you know, pick up the trash on time. Make sure the recycling goes to the recycling facility. There you go. That's very important. I know a lot of y'all recycle out here. And then for those of y'all who don't know, this is a methane heat map of our landfill. And it might be kind of hard to decode, but that yellow and red is not good. Blue is like not so good either. Of the 10 highest producing methane gas pollution landfills in America, DeKalb County is number 8. And there might be some neighbors here today who have this experience, but when I became a commissioner, we had a neighborhood meeting, and someone in the back stood up, someone who had lived in South DeKalb near Seminole Road for decades and decades, and she said, that landfill should have been closed by now. And I was like, it should have been closed? Wait, what? They've told us it's supposed to be here for the next 50 years. And she said, no. When they were planning to build and then expand the landfill in our neighborhood in South DeKalb, they said, don't worry, it'll just be here for like 20 years. We're going to close it. It's going to be this beautiful park. But it's all done. It's going to be this amazing, beautiful park. And there was actually plans that the county put together 10 years ago that actually showed where the trails would go, where the picnic tables would go, where all the recreation. It was beautiful. It was a good plan. Come to find out, that promise was made, and that promise has not been kept, because the landfill right now is slated to last until 2070. And if you look at a map, and it's, you know, that's the landfill, but if you were to look at a map north and to the east of that little blue cloud, there are literally about 1,000 people that live right there. And some of those homes had been there before the landfill. So I didn't know any of this. And somewhere in the collective knowledge of DeKalb County government, we forgot about this. People change, politicians come and go. An Environmental Justice Commission would ensure that things like that never happen again like that. That the promises that were made, the things that were said would be done to mitigate harm, actually get done. To hold not just current politicians and elected officials accountable today, but the ones in the future. All right, so we're going to call up our next speaker to get us started on what I think will be a really great discussion, and we're going to hear as well from an amazing speaker. So I want to welcome up Dewan Colion-Smith. So let's welcome up Dewan. Let's give him a hand. He's our moderator. Dewan actually came to us through a national program. He's based here in Atlanta, but he's part of the FUSE Fellowship. That's a national fellowship program of executive leaders around the country working with cities and counties on sustainability issues. So Dewan is with our office this year and hopefully next year, because FUSE is part funding his salary over here. So we appreciate the partnership there. But Dewan is specifically working on environmental justice issues. So they're going to take it from here. I'll come back a little bit later in the program. But thank y'all all again for being here, for participating, for your energy, your ideas, your enthusiasm, for making these issues top of mind and the action we're going to take today a reality. Thank you. Dewan? Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. Great facility, Pastor Harris. This is amazing. And I think it's by no coincidence that we are in New Life Church, a church, because it meets the time, the season. Just to give you background about myself, 20 years ago, fresh out of college, I thought I was going to do marketing, and I was at Emory, doing an MBA program. And this is around 2000, 2001 when they had the whole crash. And I ended up having to get a job in water and sewer in DeKalb, Atlanta. And I was crying and whining. The guy's like, I'm not equipped to do water and sewer. That's not me. But little did I know this would be the basis of where we are today, just to show you how God operates. I was working in DeKalb as a city inspector. I literally have been on every block in Atlanta, inspecting the water infrastructure. And I didn't know at the time it would be the basis for this discussion and where we are today. Just shows you have to trust the process of what God has for you. So from there, I had an opportunity, because of my background, I ended up working at the King Center with Dr. Bernice King and doing marketing. And while I was there is when I got the understanding that if Dr. King was still here today, he would be working in environmental justice. One of the last things he did in 1966 to 68, he was working in Chicago in the slums and was dealing with housing crisis. And we'll talk about that today, the relation to housing crisis has to environmental justice, sustainability, and green. So from the King Center, with the blessing of Dr. Bernice King, I started my own nonprofit project, Urban Renewable Energy, Pure, and I was focused on sustainability, climate change, and environmental justice. And I've been doing that for the last 10 years. And through Fuse, a company based out of California, Los Angeles, it allowed me to be able to become a fellow for Ted Terry. So this is where we are today. I look forward to speaking with y'all, and I'm about to introduce Daniel Blackman. When I started my nonprofit 10 years ago, he was there, and he came and spoke, and he is a leader, a presidential appointee by President Biden. He worked as a regional director for the EPA, and he right now is going to come give us his insight from a high level all the way down to how climate change and sustainability will impact DeKalb County. Here's Daniel Blackman.
Appreciate it. I want to say this first and foremost. If we had more counties that had commissions that held government accountable and that held the state and not only organizations, but these counties would operate and function much differently. And when you think about the state of Georgia, I grew up in Columbus, Georgia, but I got here by way of my parents who are from the Caribbean, from Barbados. So I'm very, very much committed to understanding that Georgia has 159 counties, and you all should be proud of Ted. You should be proud of your commission. DeKalb County, like any other county, is not perfect, but is putting measures in place to build infrastructure so that communities like this can advance. And I want to start off by saying I grew up with asthma. So, going from a kid that grew up with asthma to being a regional administrator in the southeastern United States, it means a lot. My son, who plays college football, has an emergency hailer on the sideline. So when I think of environmental justice, I don't think about it as your issue. I think of it as our issue. I think of it as an issue that all of us are learning in and growing in, but there's a perspective that we all have to take and a level of accountability. And that's really why I'm here, because I understand what it's like to sit in the seats where you all are. And as Ted mentioned, as DeJuan mentioned, I was appointed by President Biden to be the regional administrator, and then I was asked by Administrator Michael Regan to serve as the first ever senior advisor for STEM within the United States Environmental Protection Agency. And it's important for us to understand the correlation between environmental justice and how we solve our problem. I'll start with a quote that says, "We are well able to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own." And essentially what that means is your children, my children, your grandchildren, your neighbors, These individuals are expecting us to make the right decisions each and every day. But I want you to understand how these things affect you, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about why this day is important, and then I'll take my seat. First and foremost, there are several environmental policies and opportunities that have been established under the administration, starting with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, primarily, when you think of DeKalb County, most money from the agency in which I represented came through the state of Georgia. So a lot of times when you think of environmental justice, I want you to understand that it starts in places like this, because there are administrations that change, but how many people know problems don't change? So even though an administration changes, priorities change, but the issues that communities have on a daily basis are pretty, systemic, and we understand that. You mentioned, Dewan mentioned Dr. King. Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy died 61 days apart in 1968, both fighting for the same thing. Dr. King was fighting for the Poor People's Campaign in Memphis, Tennessee. Bobby Kennedy was in Appalachia fighting for poor whites and poor workers that were in that part of the country. And we've since that time moved away from environmental justice, from prioritizing it and from it being a specific issue that's critical. And that's why it's important to understand what bills and opportunities are presented, not just in your state. I think state politics are very, very important, but understanding what comes into your state from around the country and from your congressional members and your U.S. senators is just as important. When you think of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, how many people in this room knows how much the Democrats and Republicans voted on for, and don't say the answer, Ted, but how many people in here know how much money was approved by both parties? Just yell it out if you know. We don't, and that's a problem. It's $1.2 trillion. $1.2 trillion of investment for energy and infrastructure. When Michael Thurman was here, for example, a percentage of that money, $358 million, came into DeKalb County through what's called a WIFIA loan for water infrastructure, which Ted mentioned earlier. But there's also money under what's called Justice 40, which is 40% of the investment from the federal investments that have been made through the law go towards what's called marginalized communities. So think Jackson, Mississippi and their water infrastructure. Think Lowndes County, Alabama, and the fact that so many families are living on properties that have septic tanks that are not operational. Think of areas like Vine City and English Avenue, where you have so many challenges that are happening. And when you look at DeKalb and when you look at the South River, when you think of these areas, these are all areas that have to be solved, the problems that have to be addressed. And through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, if they're not commissions, EJ commissions, and what I would consider citizen opportunities to engage, not just to be in a meeting where someone sits behind a table and takes your consideration, your complaint, or your concern, but to be able to work with elected officials, to be able to hold them accountable is very important. So outside of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, you have opportunities. For example, I mentioned I grew up with asthma. How many people know that when a school bus sits idle in a community where the populations of black and brown kids are already 7, 8, and 10 times the national average of asthma, we have to do something about that. So through this administration, we've also included, through the Inflation Reduction Act, a way to address pollution from school buses. 25 million children a year depend on a school bus to pick them up and from home and to take them to school and to bring them back home. But how many people know when those buses idle, it pollutes our communities? It pollutes our lungs. When you think of what COVID did in our communities, the reason why so many black and brown communities suffered was because too often there are unaddressed pre-existing respiratory illnesses that have happened in our community. That just doesn't happen from birth. Several years ago, prior to my service with the Biden administration, I was working with the Obama administration, and I remember there was a group called the Environmental Working Group that studied toxins in marginalized communities, specifically black and brown communities. And they found that over 200 chemicals were transferred into children through the cord blood of a mother. And I want you to understand that these are issues that mothers that are carrying babies have already in their bloodstreams. And when we don't know about grants, when we don't know about funding, when we don't know about opportunities, environmental justice, which in one word, I sum up environmental justice as dignity. It's our ability and our opportunity to live longer. The life expectancy amongst white women in this country is 82 years old. The life expectancy amongst black women is 72 years old. There's a 10-year difference. The life expectancy amongst black men actually has just gone down since COVID from 70 to 68.5, but the life expectancy of white men, our counterparts, is also a decade past that time, and that's a problem. So when you look at the proximity of black and brown communities to landfills, when you look at the proximity of black and brown communities to facilities that are emitting chemicals, we have to hold those individuals accountable. One thing that I will say I was proud of when I was with the Environmental Protection Agency is under the leadership of Michael Regan, we opened the first ever, and this is going to probably sound crazy to you, but the first ever Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. And the reason why that is a challenge is because the Environmental Protection Agency has been around for over 50 years. But we've just, within the last 2 years, opened the first ever Office of Environmental Justice and External Civil Rights. Those are areas, thank you, those are areas that while they exist, a part of accountability is us being able to know how to engage them. And that's where I really want to close. In the next 2 or 3 minutes, I want to share some ways that you can, and I'm going to use a word, Ted, don't hold it against me, but how do you weaponize this commission, right? Because too often our communities are in defense, right? When you think of our communities and you think about the role the faith community plays, and my brother from Clark, Atlanta over here, Lee May, we have known each other for decades, but I understand that the front line is not only the people that are in this room, not only organizations like GIPL and individuals that represent various structures within our community, but how do you weaponize those groups? How do you come together and have a coalition in place that can then do work? Because what happened, especially, and I'll give you an example, when I was the regional administrator, I had hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals that came to me with specific issues. Those issues are designated to career employees who are overwhelmed with the amount of work that they're doing, not just for this administration, but from previous administrations. The way you actually work and get stronger in all of these areas is through stakeholder engagement and coalition building. Rooms like this have to double and triple in size over the next 6, 8, and 12 months. When you think of the ability for you all to have an Environmental Justice Commission in DeKalb County, I remember when I came to Atlanta, I came to go to Clark Atlanta University, but when I got here, I remember the only thing I would hear was about how Prince George's County and DeKalb County were the wealthiest county for black folks. That's all I would hear about DeKalb County. And it wasn't until early in my environmental career that I realized how many environmental challenges Fulton and DeKalb had. So when we think of what these bills and these opportunities can do and how we can continue to grow, it starts with these areas that I'll give you, and then I'll take my seat. Number one, working with Ted and the people next to you well beyond this day. It's great that we're here today. It's great that you all have given up a morning. As a matter of fact, you all are the only thing in between my family and I and our vacation. So I wanted to make sure that I showed up this morning, but please understand I got to get out of here soon. But I want you all to understand that what you do when you leave this room is going to be critical. Don't just look at the people on stage or the people that's on this board. Meet the people that's next to you. Some folks you met eating breakfast. Some folks you'll meet in between sessions. The second thing is to make sure that you understand, with all the election things that are going on, what these candidates are standing for and what they're doing, and how you can actually engage at a level beyond this. Not only when a person's on the ballot, but what do they do with your vote after they're elected and in office? And then lastly, I want to say thank you, because one of the things that I think is going to be important moving forward, when I left the EPA, again, it was as senior advisor of STEM. How you all get your local schools involved is critical. I know you have a school here. I think Arabian Mountain is in DeKalb County, correct? You have to support these institutions. You have to go and engage with the information that you get here today, these young people that are taking these classes that are our future. When you think of the numbers that exist within the United States of America, 58% of the federal government is of retirement age. 58% can retire. We have chemists and engineers that we have to graduate and educate in DeKalb, in our public school systems, at our colleges and universities, but more importantly in our households. So on behalf of my family and Ted and all those who invited me, I want to say thank you, and I hope that I can learn from each of you that are here today. Have a good morning.
Really want to thank Daniel Blackman for coming out and supporting us. He's got a lot going on. And so right now, I want to go over a few terms, because I know when you're talking about environmental justice, and climate change and sustainability and green, sometimes we may not be knowing what people are saying, and sometimes it'll go over our head, and then legislation gets passed, and we're like, well, how did that happen? So I want to go over a few terms real quick so that we can all be speaking the same language. So environmental justice is the just treatment and meaningful involvement of all people regardless of income, race, color, national origin, tribal affiliation, or disability in agency decision-making and other federal activities that affect human health and the environment so that people are fully protected from disproportionate and adverse human health and environmental effects, including risks and hazards, including those related to climate change, the cumulative impacts of environmental and other burdens, and the legacy of racism and other environmental and other burdens. So when we're talking about environmental justice, we are basically talking about how our climate, our weather, the pollution, how all these different aspects impact our daily lives, our neighborhoods, our kids, where they go to school, where you live and play. And then we're also going to cover in this discussion food insecurity. It's an official term from the USDA. It's when people don't have enough to eat and don't know where their next meal will come from. It's a big problem in the United States where over 44 million people, including 13 million children, experience food insecurity annually. And we're also going to talk about food deserts as well, because we may be in a situation where you may not have grocery stores within 1.5 miles of where you live, and you gotta go on the other side of town to be able to get basic food, fruit, and so we're gonna cover that as well. The next thing we're gonna talk about, as I highlighted a little bit, is food deserts. And food deserts are demographic areas where residents access to affordable, healthy foods options, especially fresh fruits and vegetables. Is restricted or non-existent due to the absence of grocery stores within convenient traveling distance. For instance, according to a report prepared by the Congress by the Economic Research Service of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, about 2.3 million people, 2% of all U.S. households, live more than 1 mile away from a supermarket and don't own a car. And so that's one of the major issues that especially in South DeKalb and Black and brown communities, being placed in a food desert and also dealing with food insecurity. And the last definition we're going to talk about is climate change. It's something that you're going to hear over and over again. In 2015, I had an opportunity to go with a cohort of HBCU students over to Paris for the COP21 convention, and the whole convention President Obama was talking about at this conference was to get the nations, 189 nations, to agree not to let the Earth's temperature go above 2 degrees Celsius by 2030 because to prevent the impacts that would happen, especially to low income and disproportionate communities. And in our coalition that we took there of college students, we protested on the floor because 2 degrees Celsius doesn't work for most developing nations, especially, African nations of that sort. So we advocated and got them to change the legislation from 2 degrees Celsius to 1.5 degrees Celsius, because that gives everyone a fighting chance as the Earth's temperature rises. If we can keep it below 1.5 degrees Celsius, it gives developing nations the same opportunities as, your major nations. So when we talk about climate change refers to long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. These shifts can be natural due to change in the sun's activity or large volcanic eruptions, but since the 1800s, human activities have been the main driver of climate change, primarily due to the burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. And that's why you've been seeing this whole change to try to get people to drive electronic vehicles and EVs to try to reduce our dependence on oil and the pollution that it causes. So these are some of the main terms that we're going to talk about. And right now we're about to play a video from Reverend Gerald Durley. He's a civil rights icon. He has been a forerunner in this space, and he does a magnificent job of making that connection between people of faith, the civil rights movement, and environmental justice. So if we go ahead and cue that video up real quick.
And then plus what's so interesting, I was trying to encourage black folks to get involved with the climate change, global warming. And one of the biggest things that we can do is an organic garden. And so over there you see, right behind there, the largest, behind that White House, the largest organic garden that are historically black at the church. There have been a lot of discussions about the role of the faith community versus the science community. I do not think they're incongruent, because God is one of the greatest scientists that I know. Whenever you can work and put DNA together and make everybody look differently in terms of the hair color and the contextual, that is the basis of science. We understand that from a theological perspective because the mind, the body, and the spirit all come together, and God is the creator of that. He is also, when he created man and woman there in the first book of Genesis, he said they must have some place to live. So what did he do? Because he was a loving, merciful, omnipotent God, he created an environment. He called it the Garden of Eden. And in that perfectly balanced ecological world, everything was right in tune with each other. The animals, the ants, the plants, and we were given the commandment. Now this was the first commandment, not the 10 commandments given in Exodus. The first commandment was take care of my earth. Be good stewards of my earth. So we got a commandment, and he gave us a commandment. Unfortunately, in today's world, we're destroying that environment, that perfectly balanced ecological world where everything came together. So the role of the faith community now must become an integral part, once again, of restoring or reestablishing, or we call it mitigating what we're doing to the climate by the change elements for what we're putting into the air. So we are an integral part working along with the science community, because right now we're not only in a political battle to save the planet, more importantly, and it frightens me, we are in an ethical moral war. The moral quotient is where we do not put greed over people, profits over people. So to do that, we've got to have an ethical moral foundation, and that's where the faith community must play an integral part of saving the planet.
How do you feel like civil rights connects to environmental justice that we are dealing with today?
When I joined the civil rights movement in 1960, I'll never forget it, I was 18 years old. There was another guy with me there. His name was John Lewis. He was 20. Andy Young was 28. C.T. Vivian was 34. And I knew nothing about it. My goal in life was to become a professional basketball player. But I began to understand when we got in the civil rights movement that it was our constitutional right to be willing to vote, access to health care, equal opportunities when it came to employment, jobs, health care, and all these. Those were constitutional rights. But then I began, so we fought for civil rights, and we got the right to vote, the right for equal opportunity. We got certain actions that would bring us in line with what the Constitution said that we deserve as citizens. We also have a right to clean energy, clean air, clean water. Those are human basic rights, and they're constitutional rights. So now we use the same kind of issues and the same kind of excitement and action that we did in the civil rights movement to bring us back to constitutional right. It's wrong for a company to go in and just wipe out a community in terms of toxic waste dumps, in terms of polluting the water, in terms of plastics in the water, in terms of all of these kinds of things that are so detrimental. People in underserved communities are suffering the most, yet they pollute the least because they cannot fight these major corporations. So we've got to once again take the civil rights action and say let's Let's organize, let's strategize, and let's mobilize once again. So the same tenets that we used then, we want to use right now to ensure that everybody has a constitutional, ethical, and a moral right to clean energy, clean water, safe air. These are things that are so essential.
What are some things you think that you have seen that we can do in DeKalb County, in the Atlanta metro area, that can bring about environmental justice and sustainability and equity for all people?
Well, first of all, I think in DeKalb County, you've got a very progressive commissioner. Terry is one of the greatest ones. He fought when he was mayor. He was always looking at a city where everybody had equality, where there was one of the most diverse cultural, racial cities when he was mayor. So he understands the broader picture. So DeKalb County, if we're to do it, if DeKalb County is to have the kind of efforts, I think the Green New Deal is so essential in bringing, first of all, the awareness that there is a concern. Once the awareness comes, then we begin to prioritize that we now realize what we are doing to the environment. So therefore, we have a moral, ethical responsibility to clean up what we are destroying. Now, in order to do that in this society, two things must come into play. We live in a capitalist society and a political society, and they work together. So now we've got to not only make the citizens aware, because all they're aware of is the suffering and the lack thereof in our underserved communities. So educating the people to the awareness that it can be done. And we've got a short window now. To try to keep it at 1.5 Celsius. We've got to keep that, and now we're exceeding that. So we've got to work along with the business community. One great example now I see moving toward electric cars, moving toward hybrid cars, because we're polluting the air so much with carbon dioxide, and we now are at a very critical point. This is not crying fire in the auditorium. This is real, and particularly among underserved and black and brown communities, we suffer the most. So we've got to go back and begin to coordinate and work as we did in the 60s, in the civil rights movement, by people coming together and putting pressure, speaking the truth to power, is the old saying.
We are about to start our panel discussion, and we want to invite all our esteemed panelists to come on stage, and I will introduce you one by one, and you can tell me your 15 seconds, what is your why? Why do you do what you do, and the organization that you are a part of? First, we have Commissioner Ted Terry, Super District 6, DeKalb County. Cody Norred for Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Attorney Gerald Griggs, Georgia NAACP. Glad you're here, sir. Joanna Libaker for ATL Adama. And then we have LaFanya Jones. She is the director for Just Energy Portfolio and Partnership for Southern Equity. You all should be familiar with former CEO of DeKalb County, Lee May. He's pastor of Transforming Church. And of course, we have Pastor Marlin Harris.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Dewan. Let's give a round of applause. Okay, so 15 seconds, all right? You tell a politician to speak
20,
15
maybe.
Seconds. I'll just say my why. Y'all met me, but my why is public service. It's community service. It's looking out for everyone, for all, especially those who don't have the power and the privilege to speak up for themselves.
Hey everybody, good morning. My name is Cody Norred. I serve as the Executive Director for Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. We really quickly seek to inspire and equip people of faith to organize, implement practical climate solutions, and advocate at the local, state, and federal levels on issues of environmental justice. And my why is, I come out of a spiritual tradition in which caring for creation is not only a commandment from God to care for the natural world, but it directly impacts our care for neighbor. So it's about the planet, it's about neighbor as well.
Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here. I'm Attorney Gerald Griggs, 13th President of the Georgia State Conference of the NAACP, the oldest civil rights organization in the nation, and more particularly in the state of Georgia. And my why is I was a young man who grew up in South DeKalb County. My parents owned a florist on Glenwood for most of my formative years, from birth to about 12 years old. And so DeKalb is near and dear to my heart. But more importantly, Georgia is near and dear to my heart, and I want a future for the future residents of Georgia with clean air, clean energy, making sure that we have a sustainable state and ultimately a sustainable planet.
Hi, I'm Joanna Kobe-Lifker. I'm the Jewish community organizer with Gimel. I'm also the director of Adama ATL, which is the Atlanta hub of the national Jewish organization Adama. And my why is to honor those that came before me that did this work and to continue to do the work and to model for my children the important work we need to keep doing.
Good morning. My name is Lee May. I am a reformed politician. The Lord has promoted me. Thank you, Jesus. I am the pastor of Transforming Faith Church. We're located in Stonecrest, Georgia, so pleased to be in this wonderful facility as well. My why, number one, preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm a pastor, of course. And number two, to speak for the voiceless and plead the cause of the poor and needy. That's scripture. So.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Pastor, for having us, Pastor Harris. My name is Lavanya Jones. I'm the director of the Just Energy Portfolio at Partnership for Southern Equity, and I also teach innovation and design at Morehouse College. At Partnership for Southern Equity, really quickly, we work to advance policy and institutional actions for racial equity and shared prosperity. My why is very similar to Cody's. I'm a believer, a person of faith, and it's about God's command to be a good steward of the earth, be good neighbors, and make sure that all of God's creation is able to live in a healthy and sustainable environment, and that we care for the earth that God has given us.
Hello, everyone. I'm Pastor Marlin Harris. I'm the pastor here at New Life Church, and part of going last is that you have nothing new to say that hasn't already been said. My why fits right in line with everyone else. There is a vertical and horizontal relationship that we as human beings have with God and man. And you cannot have a proper relationship vertically with God unless you're caring for his creation. His creation is not only the earth, but it's also the people in his creation. And so this is horizontal and vertical, and environmental justice connects both of those at a nexus, and that's the cross. You know, it is loving people by loving the planet, by loving each other, and doing what is right and best for the health and environment of those in which we live. It's what Jesus called being a good neighbor, and that's my why.
Yes, yes. So we're about to start this conversation, and I'm going to start with Pastor Harris. People may want to understand, well, what is the church doing? Why, would you bring the church involved with climate change? But when I started this work, God showed me in Genesis 2:15, he put Adam and Eve in the garden to tend and keep it. So originally, that's our purpose. People of faith are supposed to be in charge, to serve and keep the garden, to grow and be good stewards. So it's something that the church should be involved in. So with that being stated, from a biblical perspective, what are some of the things that you all are doing, and what do you see that the church needs to do, not just in DeKalb, but overall to carry out that mandate that we see in Genesis 2:15?
Well, I think Dr. Durley and DeJuan both said it so well, that this is a theologically rich issue, that you can't divorce environmental cultivation, environmental stewardship from our theology. It's the first command of God. In the Old Testament, we see this being repeated over and over again. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, that this earth, this planet, belongs to God, and we are stewards of it. We're in charge of keeping it. A steward is important because he represents the owner of the property that he's stewarding. So we represent God. In the New Testament, we also see the same concept, the same idea. I like to tell people that when Jesus calmed the storm that was raging and he spoke peace to the storm, he didn't do that just for the sake of the people that were in the boat. It was a storm, and he gave peace to that which was causing a disturbance in the environment. That's the ministry of the church. It's not just to give peace to the souls of people, but it is also to give peace to the environments that people live in. We see that as a primary responsibility of the church's mission and ministry. We cannot minister to people if we are not ministering to them holistically. This is not just, their spirits and souls, getting them ready for heaven, which is what a lot of churches, and there's nothing wrong, of course, focus on, and we should. That's the gospel. But also getting us ready for earth. Earth is just as critical in our spiritual experience as heaven is. And so we have a responsibility to do what we believe Jesus would be doing if he were here alive physically on the earth. And we know that he would be caring for the sick and the disabled and the infirmed. We know that he'd be concerned about mental health issues and the rest, because that's what he did when he was here. He'd be concerned about those who are hurting and homeless and heartbroken, because that's his grace and his anointing. And so the church has a responsibility to do that. Now, practically, we see ourselves as juniors in this space. And I need to be very honest that this has not been the traditional bent of the church. You don't see a lot of churches engaged in environmental justice issues. A large part of what we're doing here is in community revitalization. We were addressing the issues of poverty from a systemic and symptom perspective. And so this is giving food to the hungry, clothes to those that are naked. This is doing dignity services, helping people that are without, trying to find them spaces to live, and etc. That was addressing the symptoms, and that's important. But then we notice that there are some sources to those symptoms that the church needs to address. This is not addressing poverty after it's here, but mitigating and preventing it from coming. And that's a major responsibility of environmental justice. And so we saw in revitalizing our community by building sustainable housing, affordable housing for individuals who cannot afford it, making certain that our schools have healthy food choices, healthy education choices, healthy educator choices, was a major part of what we're looking to do. And so it's not just touching the symptoms of poverty, but it's also addressing the source of poverty at its root. And you cannot do that without concerning yourself with what I call the 4 determinants of poverty. This is housing, healthcare, workforce development, as well as jobs and economic growth. Those things are critical whenever you are trying to mitigate poverty. In doing that, environmental justice is wrapped into each one of those pieces and a critical part of it. And that's what our church is trying to do and trying to inspire other churches to do as well.
When we think about what you said about the people of faith in the church and making that connection with environmental justice, I want to turn the conversation to Commissioner Terry. How do you reconcile what's the Green New Deal? Because when people hear green, we think about all the polar bears, or we think about the fish in the sea, but there's actually people in Ellenwood in South DeKalb that are experiencing traumatic events due to climate change, environmental justice. So how do you reconcile your Green New Deal proposal, climate change, and environmental justice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Pastor Harris really began to unravel and I think highlight the intersectionality of a lot of this work. And when we launched the DeKalb Green New Deal, environmental justice is a core foundation and principle of the DeKalb Green New Deal, but also it is the foundation of what the people want. And it's our own backyard, it's our own issues, problems, but also the opportunities that actually we can solve. We can solve them together. And one of the programs that you touched on that I want to highlight that is done in New Life is that workforce development, is that job training, is that economic opportunity. It is somewhere in the Bible about teach a man to fish, I think. And so we were talking earlier about the energy efficiency program, the solar installation. Green jobs cannot be outsourced. When you were talking about transitioning to clean energy, clean transportation, a healthier environment, that not only means changing the systems and reducing emissions, but there's a lot of mitigation work that has to be done. We have to do a lot of environmental work out there in the community, in our neighborhoods, in our own homes, in our schools, in our churches. I know Gipple can talk about the programs they have for houses of worship. All of that footprint, that carbon footprint, someone has to do the work. And these are jobs that are skilled, They have cross technicians, sort of certifications. You do one thing in the electric space or the energy efficiency space, you can do 10 other jobs that are out there in the world. And we teach those to fish. They pay it forward. We're lifting all the boats. And hopefully in that sea, to take the metaphor a little longer, that sea is calm. And it's not rising too much, right? But we're prepared for it. So when we talk about the DeKalb Green New Deal, environmental justice is a core principle, but you merge the environmental justice, economic justice, social justice, and put people at the center of what we want to achieve in our own community.
Absolutely. So, Cody, as we're thinking about environmental justice, it's because of pollution. And we remember in 1982 in North Carolina when they started the whole protest about pollution in communities. The work, can you expound on the work that you all do and how we can, as voters in this season, whether it's President Biden or President Trump, how do we get the EPA to kind of get better enforcement on the rules and the laws so that the people can be more sustainable and can participate in these green initiatives?
I can't believe you let Daniel Blackman walk out of here so you can ask me this question. So I mean, really quickly, what we do is try to work with people on the ground in local communities to do practical, tangible projects right there in communities. You know, energy efficiency on buildings, solar on buildings, water efficiency on buildings, so that the community is implementing those solutions, seeing the bill savings, and also seeing the public health savings and drawing down that carbon emission so that we can contribute to some of those community efforts. I mean, you talk about, you know, the EPA, there's some good stuff that has come out of the Inflation Reduction Act around this. I think in particular what comes to mind are the carbon and soot rules for power plants. Not a lot in DeKalb County, but Georgia generally has a lot of generating facilities, coal-fired power plants and natural gas-fired power plants. So these rules help to draw down, I think, in conjunction with the rest of the IRA, would draw down sort of the utility scale pollution by about 70% from peak pollution in 2005. So that's real impact for air pollution. Georgia has some of the most polluting coal plants in the country. So even though they're not right here, that air and water moves around this state. We know that. We have a Georgia Public Service Commission that insists on not doing right by Georgia communities. So they have not implemented the clean energy solutions that we need. They have not prioritized people being able to pay for their bills, and they have not prioritized public health. So that makes these federal rules even more important, because as the Public Service Commission has authorized more natural gas, we have federal rules and regulations on those new natural gas plants to make them less polluting. So all of those kind of things go hand in hand. I would just say, you know, these federal rules have been incredibly impactful, but you ask about elections, and I would just point back to local officials. Make it local. There's a lot of conversation about sort of what we can do at the federal level, but in reality, all this stuff really comes down to what are your county commissioners doing, what are city council members doing, what are your public service commissioners doing. So I would say focus some of that energy towards local elections.
Absolutely. So to go further on into that, Attorney Griggs, most people when they think about the NAACP, they think about, you know, civil rights, right to protest. How important that we make that connection, and what is the NAACP's involvement in protesting for environmental rights and environmental justice, and what are some of the things that you all are doing in Georgia and in DeKalb?
So what people need to understand is there's a nexus between civil rights and environmental rights, because you can't truly be free if your climate and your environment is polluted. And so many times when we're dealing with violations of people's human rights or civil rights, there's a component to the environment that they're living in where there's exceptional waste that is there, there's exceptional lack of intentionality by elected officials to improve those conditions, which give rise to unnecessary contact with law enforcement, poverty, and things that give drivers to inequity. And so at the NAACP, under the leadership of our national president, Derek Johnson, and the chairman, we have instituted on all of the units a requirement to have an environmental justice committee that is assigned at the branch level. Because anybody knows anything about the NAACP, the work is done in the unit and it's done at the branch level. So across the state, we currently have 134 units. There are 100 of them that are active. We have a committee there to address these issues. So in like DeKalb County, we want to address the issues with regard to watershed, we want to address the issues with regard to that big training facility that's being built over there right in front of the forest called Cop City. And so we are intentional in pushing back because we know that specifically with Cop City, we're going to see, one, the destruction of the forest that's there, but two, training to disproportionately target African Americans and people of color by militarizing the police. So when people ask the question, what's the NAACP doing in this area? We are supporting the activists that are on the ground. We are making sure we speak truth to power both in DeKalb and Atlanta, and we are pushing on the federal, state, and local level to make sure they are intentional in protecting minority communities from the disproportionate impact of issues in the environment that cause the inability to have a productive life. So we are on the front lines of those issues and supporting the institutions that have been doing this work for years.
Absolutely. So with that said, what we're framing here is a world house of different individuals, different backgrounds, different faiths and religions. And so, Joanna, from the Jewish community, how can we connect with you all, and what is some of the work we're doing? Because we're all in this world house, we're all in this community, we all have a role to play to make this a more green and equitable and sustainable place. So what is some of the work we can do, and how can people join with you in that work?
Absolutely, thank you. It's worth noting just the 2-second background of why I'm on this stage. I am not a rabbi, I'm not a climate scientist, I'm not a farmer. I'm really a person, I'm a mom, and I, like a lot of people in this room, I sort of saw something I didn't like in this world, and I turned to faith and tried to make sense of a world that was just not the world that I wanted it to be. And so my journey really started in a public school. I live in Fulton County, my kids were at Atlanta Public Schools, and I noticed they were using styrofoam trays all day, every day, twice a day. And I thought, that's interesting, it's 2019, why are we? And so I connected with other moms, and I actually connected with a mom in DeKalb County, and learned that they convinced their school board to get rid of styrofoam. And so I just started building community and connecting with fellow parents. We attended board meetings, and we learned that in a single year, Atlanta Public School throws away 8.4 million styrofoam trays, which is, if anyone doesn't know, styrofoam is the worst. It's really bad. It comes apart. It leaches polystyrene in our water and our soil. Our children are eating it on the hot food that they are served, breakfast and lunch. Terrible. So I just sort of, looked around. What else can we do? And turned to my faith, and we've quoted Genesis a lot today. So in keeping with Genesis, we learn that man is Adam. Adam means man, and Adamah is earth. So we know man comes from earth. And it says, God made man from the dust, from the soil. And then we also learn that we are created in God's image. So we know we are created from that from which we came. And so we have this burden and this responsibility to care for our earth. And so I sort of, like a lot of people here, started really trying to understand what else happens in my faith that can guide me and help me kind of rally the troops. And I learned even more about our traditions, and surprise, so many of them point to that we really are a people of the land. We are taught to be grateful and humble and acknowledge where every food that we eat comes from. And I was so fortunate to get connected with DeKalb. And so the work that we do it through building community, providing what we call gentle accountability, and by providing support, and that's technical and financial. So the community part is really the joyful stuff. That's doing interfaith tree plantings every year. We do river cleanups every year. We're really trying to bring people together joyfully but meaningfully to really elevate these values that are so fundamental to so many of our faiths, that this is who we are as a people. And then the gentle accountability, that's our way of saying, you really need to do this. And so we have something called the Jewish Leadership Climate Coalition, which is a network of over 300 Jewish institutions around the country. And we provide them with this roadmap. So it's less intimidating when you know exactly what it is you need to do to really reduce your carbon footprint. So, and that's when we really lean on GIPL to really help the institutions here in Georgia. You know, let's get you an energy audit. Let's see what we can do to reduce, you know, your energy bills, get you more energy efficient. Let's look at your waste streams. Why do you throw away so much? Why do you waste so much food? But we help them. And then the technical support is really these audits, these access to grants. And it's also worth noting that I really try to rely on my, you know, I'm just like you. I'm learning this too. I'm a middle child. I like everyone to get along, and I'm just a peacemaker and a problem solver. I have 2 boys, so I'm accepting prayers for how to keep the peace in my house. But really, I think if we come together in just an honest way and say, we're all trying, and it's overwhelming, but there are tools that we can use, and this is just, we owe it to ourselves, to our children, to do this work. Thank you.
Yes, yes. So, CEO, former CEO, Lee May, I'm gonna give you a difficult one. Don't beat me up after this. But one of the things that we've seen at the town halls that Commissioner Ted Terry's had throughout the district that I've had fortunate to be able to go and attend is people, you know, they keep asking, what are the tangibles? We voted, we pay our penny splosh taxes, and we don't see, you know, the results that we want. So as a former CEO, someone who knows the whole, you know, grounds of everything that's going on in DeKalb, what would you tell the people they need to be doing in order, and what are some of the tangibles that you feel like are accessible that we can get to kind of, you know, address these systemic issues that we've seen in DeKalb County?
It's a good question. I don't think it's that hard, that question. I don't know if I have a good answer for it. But, and actually, I would reverse that. And so you said, what can the people do? I really think, so I sit up here not as an expert. This is not my lane. I'm not here to tell you what we ought to be doing about environmental justice, but I do understand its importance. I think it was wise that you gave definitions up here for all of us. You know, and I read them, I had them before. I read them all through, line by line. And I read them and listened as you were reading them as well. I think the people just need to be empowered more. And I think that's a lot of the work that is reflected up here, that there has to be the building of community, the building of understanding of the relevance of environmental justice. Because if you want to be just really honest about this dialogue, most people, and I don't think I'm exaggerating by saying this, most people just don't see the direct impact on their lives. And so when I think about things at our church, in our community, the people that we represent, people are just trying to survive, trying to keep their head above water. They're trying to keep or get into affordable housing. They're trying to make a livable wage. They're trying to get their kids educated in a quality school and in a safe neighborhood and things like that. And so a conversation like this, even though we know it's important, it just doesn't raise as high on the list of the direct challenges. And so I do think, and again, like I said, I don't know that I'd have the answers, but the building of community, the speaking in ways that I think the layperson can understand and see the direct impact in our lives. You know, I do think, for example, there's been a lot of conversation about the landfill here and seeing how that the landfill and its impact on the community does have. you know, on the community, you know, and what can you do with that landfill? When I was a commissioner, the landfill was in my district, and Commissioner Terry, my first meeting after I got elected July 13th, I believe was the exact date, 2006. And maybe 2 weeks later, I had a community meeting. Didn't know anything about government. All this bright ideas that I had on the campaign trail, now it was time to see if these were really good ideas. And in Ellenwood, Alice Bussey,
Yeah.
some people, who grew up in that community, who generation after generation, she came to me and said, this is nearly 20 years ago, we were promised that that landfill was going to be closed. That's what she said to me. Now, here's the reality, and I tried to be as honest with them as possible. I said, Ms. Bussey, I don't know if this landfill is going to be closed. Because the reality is, if you close a landfill now, where are you going to put another one? What is now and the reality is, if you close that landfill, the likelihood of it being in another community, primarily people of color, is very high. You know, and so now what do we do in terms of what is here now? How do we reduce the amount of methane gas that is being produced in the community? Another aspect of that is you look at all the houses around the landfill. Part of that is not just environmental justice or injustice, but it's a racial dynamic in terms of the realtors. Let me tell you how many times people who live in that area tell me they bought their house, nice square footage, nice house. The realtors took them away that they didn't go past the landfill. And some weeks after they closed on their house, they were in their house, they began to smell some things, and they're like, what is that? And then they found out that a landfill was around the corner. So you literally have thousands upon thousands of people who moved in that area, not understanding what was impacting their community. And so really just kind of creating a conversation where people can see its real impact on their lives, I think is going to be absolutely critical. And let me also add this as well. As a county commissioner, you know, the Board of Commissioners approved land use changes, zoning, things like that. I would just recommend that we begin to think about the environmental impact on new development, redevelopment in areas as well. For example, you know, you come in and you clear cut trees on a lot. You know, community residents, you have the opportunity to say, okay, we want to make sure that we're replacing those trees or whatever, or that you're only cutting certain number of whatever, I forget what the county code even requires, but that you're putting conditions in those changes for development that comes. And so there's power that you have as people are developing or redeveloping our community. But again, we just have to understand how it impacts our day-to-day life.
Yep.
So when we're talking about different stakeholders, and I'm gonna address this to Lavanya, when we're talking about different stakeholders and people wanting to engage, one of the largest segments that now are very vocal, we've seen on the campuses of Emory, Georgia Tech, HBCUs, where the students now, they realize this is the planet, this is the community they're gonna inherit. So they're really concerned and activated about climate change and environmental justice. So what are some of the things that you all are doing, Partnership for Southern Equity, to help empower, you know, the youth, the young people that are really engaged and active in this area?
Absolutely. So with Partnership for Southern Equity, particularly my portfolio, we have 5 other portfolios in addition to mine because we understand that these issues are intersectional. But in the Just Energy portfolio, we define energy burden or energy equity as the fair distribution of the benefits and burdens of energy production and consumption. That is relevant to young people because young people are realizing, one, the earth is getting hotter. Climate events are accelerating. We've seen an increase in wildfires. We've seen an increase in sea level rise. There was a report that came out recently that Venezuela has now lost all of their glaciers, which impacts that community's water access. And we are having reports that if certain glaciers in certain parts of the world rise, Florida will be gone. New Orleans, gone. Our coast, these coastal communities are gone. We have young people that are growing up in Cancer Alley in Louisiana. They're growing up with increased rates of asthma, increased rates of not healthy food that are causing health issues. And then we have the water crisis. Flint, water crisis. But there are over 3,000 communities in the United States, many of which that are much worse than Flint, Michigan. And our children are growing up in these communities. And so they're coming to our colleges and our universities caring about these issues. So at Partnership for Southern Equity, in addition to my portfolio, we have a whole youth organizing arm called Yes for Equity, where we have about 13 to 15 youth organizers across the country advocating for environmental issues as well as other issues that impact poverty and different things of that nature. In our portfolio, we have our coalition building arm, which is our Just Energy Circle. Our portfolio works across 12 states in the Southeast, so as far west as Arkansas, Louisiana, as far north as West Virginia, Kentucky, and Virginia, because we can't talk about addressing issues in Appalachia and Tennessee without also including West Virginia and Kentucky, because it's pretty bad. So in our Just Energy Circle, we're looking to have youth representatives from each of those states that will be able to voice their concerns around what is going on. We also have our Just Energy Academy, which is our leadership development arm, where we're training grassroots leaders on the ground in the communities so that we don't have people with savior mentalities coming into our communities, telling us what we need and what we need to do, when those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And so in our Just Energy Academy, I'm sorry, y'all see I'm short, my feet don't touch the ground. Chair keep turning. So in our Just Energy Academy, we have youth representatives. Right now, we have representatives in our Just Energy Academy from Morehouse School of Medicine. I see him here. Hi. Thanks for being here. We have Spelman College. We have Clark Atlanta University. We have Emory University. We have Georgia Tech in our Just Energy Academy, and they are learning how to lead with racial equity in these conversations around environmental and climate justice. Then we also have our Resiliency Hub project, where we are looking to create resiliency hubs on the campuses of not only our historically Black colleges and universities, but also our tribal colleges. Because Black and Indigenous communities in particular are impacted first and worst by these climate issues. And we know that our institutions are pillars of our communities. And so what a Resiliency Hub is a facility that would have solar or renewable energy power, where if there's a power outage in the area, people that need to store medicine or plug up their oxygen tanks can get access to that power to be able to handle those things. It's also a community resource where people can be trained on some of these green jobs that are coming to communities. They can be trained on how to lower their utility bills. People should not have to decide between paying their light bill and getting their medication. And so those are some of the things that we're looking to do to engage young people in this work. We will be doing some community activations in the fall on our college campuses to rally students around these issues. I mentioned that I do teach at Morehouse College and in the Atlanta University Center. We have Sustainable Spelman, we have Morehouse More Green, which are our student organizations that are dealing with these issues every single day directly. So we understand that, I have always said, historically, if you look at any revolution, it has always started with our young people. And we are not going to have a climate revolution, we're not going to have an economic revolution unless we engage and include our young people. The last thing I'll say around workforce development. So the federal government, Georgia Tech did this study, has prioritized several technologies for a just transition. One of my main goals in this role at Partnership for Southern Equity is to make sure that our Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities are not left out of those technologies. Whether it's just educating them and building awareness around how those technologies will impact their communities, or helping them start businesses related to those technologies, or helping our young people and others get jobs related to those technologies. And so those are just a few ways. There are a lot of other things that we do. We're also tackling the school bus issue. I don't remember who brought that up. But Daniel, yeah, we have a project with, actually the Yes for Equity portfolio is leading that, where they're looking at transforming school buses to electric school buses to reduce the diesel that is increasing asthma among our young children when they take the bus to school, and also polluting our environments. So I'll leave it there.
Yes, yes. Okay, so now I'm about to open this discussion up. Anyone can answer and add, content to these questions. And so feel free to just jump in. The first question that a lot of people have been talking about, and it brings up all the time at town halls and even at the DeKalb meetings, is the SPLOST, the penny tax. Where is our money going? I still got potholes. I'm not seeing the infrastructure fixed in my community. So what will you all say that people can do to get more engagement from their commissioner? Because with each person has their own commissioner and a part of DeKalb. How can we get that SPLOST money to be more active, especially in South DeKalb? Anybody can jump in.
Well, I know the natural thing is to point to the commissioner up here, but number one, you got to be engaged. So I'm like on all the commissioners' email lists, so I'm seeing that they're having community meetings for the list of projects as well. I will say this one thing, because SPLOST is pretty close to my heart. I actually helped write the first bill for SPLOST to happen, because DeKalb didn't have a 1% sales tax to pay for its infrastructure for a decade. Oh, thank you. Yes. But it didn't have one. And so the day that penny sales tax went into effect, we were literally 1,000 miles behind in repaving roads. So if you say, well, I haven't seen it, well, they got to get to the first. It's like blocking and tackling in football. You got to get to the bare basics. And again, going to this point of making it relevant, this conversation about environmental justice. And I know that the conversation in this context is how can we build that into the list of projects, but being able to talk proactively about the needs and how we can implement that with the real life reality of what's in place. 1,000 miles of roads have not been repaved since this process started. And so that work is still in place and needed right now. So the question is now, how do you balance that conversation and say, all right, we still want to be considerate about the future and our environment in the future with our real practical needs right now. And I think being able to have a balance, because it's not, I don't think you go into that conversation with a fight saying we got to do this, we got to have 30% of these projects in there, but it's like, now let's keep in mind that we have to be good stewards of our environment for the future. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. So yeah, throw scripture out there. That's in Proverbs 13 if you need that or whatever. No one can ever argue against scripture, right? Just, so we have to be considerate about that. But you have to be educated, number one, on what SPLOST is. And if you don't know what SPLOST stands for, let's start with that first. Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax.
Absolutely, and I'll just add to that because CEO May is exactly right. Well, number one, the SPLOST 1 that just wrapped up in April, that was the first 6-year SPLOST that DeKalb County had ever had for infrastructure. That was his idea, his initiative, set it up for the next, group of politicians to, for CEO Thurman and everyone to take it forward to the Capitol to work with our legislators. And we just passed SPLOST 2. And last November, the sales tax for that just began being collected April 1st of this year. It is a pay-as-you-go program. So to the extent that as sales tax revenues come in every month into the coffers, the goal is to begin to spend it on these priority projects. Good news is that it's still going to take another 2 years for us to finish spending the first SPLOST 1 money. So there's still another 2 years of work that's already on the schedule to be done with the revenues we've already collected. And then, hopefully we kind of get to a point where we sort of have everyone mobilized and we can just keep this work going, day in and day out. Advocating is key here, though, because what the commissioners and what y'all voted on, you didn't vote on specific projects, you voted on categories. So we know we've got another, almost $200 million for road paving. All right, that's probably the biggest chunk of it. But we got in there money for sidewalks, trails, mental health facilities, intergenerational facilities, rec centers, senior centers, fire stations, clean energy projects. That was something that a lot of y'all helped advocate for this time last year when we were putting together the categories. $7.5 million for clean energy projects that will probably mean solar energy efficiency. But every year the money comes in, commissioners as a board have to vote to approve ultimately these priority projects, and then the contracts and the auditing and all that stuff afterwards. So when you talk to your commissioners, everyone has 2 commissioners, that should be on your mind. There's something in my neighborhood that I really want us to take care of. Say something about it. Because I guarantee you there's a long list of other people, other neighbors that are also like, y'all got to get to this. So part of it's advocacy, and CEO May is exactly right. We are behind. We're still behind. And after this SPLOST 2, we'll still be behind on a lot of the infrastructure work. So the important thing, and I've learned in government, is just get it on the list. Is that fair? Get it once it's on the list, and you make sure that list stays the list. We start getting to it. All right. So that's going to be key. But we definitely want to focus on the clean energy projects. I think I'm very excited about, because doing those projects is actually going to help us save money, as well as create jobs, as well as reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so that $5 to $7 million will pay for itself over the next 10 years.
Anyone else? Now, to go into that, one of the things that's very obvious when we're talking about environmental justice and making sure people have access is housing. We have a housing crisis in DeKalb. One of the issues is because we've allowed different investors to come in and buy up over 30% of the inventory, which that allows them to be able to control pricing and inflate pricing and control access. Let me make sure I get this right. There's a few things I want to highlight before we discuss it. Cost burden households are defined as households that spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And we know a lot of us are spending more than 30% in order just to stay where we are, live where we are. Overall, it says 1 out of 3 DeKalb households are living in an affordability problem. 1 out of 3, that's 35%. Cost burden renters. Renters is a big issue. It's 53% of people who are cost burdened with their rent. The rent based on income for DeKalb County is supposed to be $1,100 a month. I know y'all laughing, but that's what it's supposed to be. And according to an Emory study in 2021, it was well over $1,500, and I'm sure now it's even higher than that. So how can we, what are some things that we can do to address this housing crisis, especially the renter crisis and the developers buying up different properties and controlling the market? What are your all thoughts on that?
This is something that's very close and near and dear to me, not just in DeKalb County, but in the entire metro. There has to be a concerted conversation with the commissioners about zoning and allowing these investors to come in and build these projects that are not affordable to regular workforce development individuals and people with regular jobs. And so we've had this problem in the city of Atlanta, we've had this problem in Fulton, of course there's a problem in DeKalb County and all over the metro area. We have to have a real conversation about what affordability looks like, because when you have 30% of out of state investors that control both the housing stock and the rental stock, jacking up these prices. I mean, hearing that, you know, housing affordability is supposed to be $1,100 for rent. I don't know anybody that's paying $1,100 for rent. I know I'm not paying $1,100 for rent, and I own my own home and another piece of property. So What I think we have to do is be intentional with our elected officials who are allowing the development to occur. Yes, we want to revitalize communities, but we don't want to push out the legacy residents that are living there. So when I see large-scale redevelopment, and let's be clear, the large-scale redevelopment is happening in communities where people are aging, they may not be able to afford to keep up the property taxes on the house, and so they go and they sell mama's house, they sell grandmama's house, and the next thing you know, the people that live in grandmama's old neighborhood don't look like the people that used to live there. And there's not a building of actual affordable housing and rental stock for those people to stay there. I mean, people want to stay, and they want a nicer South DeKalb. They want a nicer Lithonia. They want a nicer Stonecrest. But they also want to make sure that they get to inherit the niceness. You know, I was looking just the other day. They just demolished North DeKalb Mall. Okay, what's going there? I think it's called Lula Hills, right? I don't think that the people who used to live around there are going to be able to afford Lula Hills. Because what, they're going to say, oh, they're going to have maybe 500 units that are below AMI, which is annual medium income. What is that? 30% under that is $2,000 rent for a 900 square foot living space. We got to put numbers to this stuff. So when you say $2,000 for 900 square feet or 700 square feet, y'all, that's half a bedroom, a kitchen, and a little bit of living space.
It's about 3 of these carpets.
Yeah, 3 of the carpets for 2 to 3 people to live in. You can't live there. And so I think we got to have that real conversation with our elected officials. Look, push back on the developers a little bit. You know, I know they're funding campaigns. But let's be clear. Campaign contribution does not turn into votes. Engaging with the people to what the people want will get votes, and those votes will not be bought by television ads.
I have to jump in in this. This is right up our alley. Amen to everything you're saying. I'm bringing you back Sunday to say that again. We've been in this space for a little while now, recognizing that if we do not develop our community, revitalizing it, not gentrifying it, and we're not anti-gentrifists, but legacy residents. Now, legacy residents is defined as someone who currently lives in that community at a certain living experience. And that's not just the money that they're paying, but it's the schools, it's the neighbors, the neighborhood, the experience itself. Whenever you have large-scale developers that are coming in to build these massive housing, massive, live, work, play environments, are beautiful, but those residents cannot live there. At our church, we had this experience to happen just down the street here on Candler Road. There was a developer who purchased an apartment complex, and in one lease turnover, right? That means if your lease is 3 more months left, that's a turnover. 4 more months, 1 more month, whatever that lease is out. In one lease turnover, the rent went up 2.5x in one lease turnover. It was a mass eviction out of that apartment complex. And that's not hypothetical, that happened. Our local commissioner called, and we got 11 of those families that were evicted in one night. 11 families, and had to put them in extended stay hotels in this immediate area. You just went from an apartment complex to living at Budgetel Inn. That's a major, major statement. I mean, are you understanding the impact of that? That is happening throughout Candler Road, and this is just our area that I know about, but it's happening in apartment complexes throughout Candler Road. It's going up 0.5x, 1x, 1.5x, sometimes twice as much, and you can't prepare for that if you're only doing that in 6 months. In 6 more months, your rent's going to double. That's hard to prepare. Any one of us couldn't prepare for that in 6 months. And so it's a major concern. We've decided to revitalize our community and our area. There's property here. We don't currently own it. We know who owns it. He owns it. We know who owns it. And we believe it could be better used for affordable housing, to make certain that people who live here get an opportunity to stay here. And it's not just the housing piece, it's the education piece. It's putting quality schools in our environment. It's also the workforce development, economic growth piece, making certain that our environment has jobs that pay a living wage that people want to work at, and making it so that companies want to come to our community. So we need the support of our politicians and elected officials to help make sure that happens. And it is equal and equitable access to health care. If you go from 285, really further down, all the way to downtown Decatur, just on this street alone, you're not going to touch any prominent or significant healthcare providers. If you have a specialized illness and you need a specialist, you cannot get one in this community. You have to go to Dunwoody or Stockbridge or McDonough or someplace else to go see a specialist. How many of our residents can afford to actually do that when MARTA is their only transportation and they're working jobs during the day? They cannot afford to travel to do that. We need to have those things in our own backyards. That doesn't happen unless it's intentional. Last thing I'll say about that, then I'm done. If I believe that the business world, and I'm a businessman, I understand business and appreciate it, but the business world is not going to do this. There isn't a large return. There isn't a large profit margin in this. They're not going to do this. It is incumbent upon nonprofits, communities of faith, and governmental agencies to make this happen. It's not going to happen any other way, right? So we know that if we don't purchase, acquire, joint venture, or something with the land that I'm speaking of, if we don't do it, somebody is. They're coming from New York, they're coming from Abu Dhabi, they're coming from Saudi Arabia, they're coming from California. Somebody else is going to do it, and they're not going to care two hill of beans about this community. So we have to do it ourselves, and we have to do it ourselves.
I want to speak really quickly to something that community members can do. So one, we have to get really, really honest about how we define affordable housing. A lot of communities in metropolitan Atlanta define affordable housing as for those who are making an income of $45,000 to $55,000. But a lot of these communities where they're putting affordable housing, the income is $17,000 to $25,000. So affordable for who? We have to ask that question. Secondly, as citizens, as residents, we have to take community benefit agreements way more seriously and require them. A community benefit agreement is where you can outline what anyone comes into your community to do. A developer, a business, whoever. And you can set those parameters so that those community benefit agreements preserve the history, the cultural context, and what you all want in your community. Our communities are not leveraging community benefit agreements enough, and we can make these developers and businesses and whoever abide by those agreements before they do anything in your neighborhood. So just want to look those two things up.
Yeah, this is a really important topic, and we're actually going to have more discussions on specifically housing, sustainable housing, affordable housing this year and really the years to come, because as CEO May kind of pointed out earlier in his comments, the commissioners have all the power when it comes to land use planning and zoning. And you're exactly right. In those conditions, in order to get a entitlement where higher density goes here, or another use from maybe industrial to housing goes here, you put in the zoning conditions, it's law. It means you have to do it. And you can do it through affordability. You say it has to be a certain percentage of affordability. You can ask for certain environmental features. We've done this before, where we say only a certain percentage can be rental, right? And then that's designed so that someone cannot come in later and buy the whole complex, right? A whole group of townhomes and say now they're 100% rental. And so we can create those protections. Those community benefits are so, so key. This is why we've really been, this is why one of the things we highlighted today out in the hallway is the village conservation concept, because it is trying to create the incentives for any new development to respect the neighborhood that is coming into, to give affordability, environmental features that are actually going to benefit the larger community, and not create a new community where there's a fence around and everyone who lives outside of it can just look at it and say, oh, it looks nice. I wish I could walk through those areas. Because all the new developments have to have new sidewalks, new stormwater, new trees. It looks like a brand new community, but then they put a fence around it and a gate up, and then no one's allowed in it. And so there's this idea of when you bring in new development, how it does actually impact the larger community. And the big concept that we're really focusing on, this is about affordability, because affordability is paying the rent, is paying the utilities, but there's a lot of other things on the list you got to pay for. If you're a family, childcare. If you've got an elderly parent, senior care. And this concept, this is the village concept, and we've talked with Pastor May about this and Pastor Harris, we've got to bring back the village. Intergenerational communities is what we should be developing. We should have a space for our seniors, a space for our families, space for the newlyweds who don't have kids yet but want to get more involved in the community, and that village brings us and ties us all together. And now we're looking out for each other. The church and our houses of worship do that on their own, but you start having, as Pastor Harris's vision has talked about, our houses of worship developing their own communities of intentionality. And they're not owned by developers that get Wall Street funding that are looking for a 20% return on profits. Okay, so this is why you see all these investors happening in the housing space, because you go to the stock market and on average you're going to get 6% return every year, year over year for the next 20 years. You invest in real estate housing, 15, 20, 25% return. So that's why you're seeing all this money going into speculation, land, buying apartment complexes, because it's a good investment. We have to have that notion of what is in the public's interest. The church, our government agency, our housing authorities, the new model that's not a new model, but they rediscovered it, is this idea of a public housing corporation, one that thinks like a developer, but is looking for a 3% return on their investment, which means that every profit they make goes right back into the system, but what they're creating is not temporarily affordable. It is permanently affordable for the next 100 years, the next 200 years, permanent affordable housing. We start building more of that, then we're beginning to address a lot of the housing supply and housing affordability issues. We can't, unfortunately, I think state law, and I know our Becky and others and Angela have been working on this in the Capitol, we can't just tell outside renting, investment hedge funds, oh, you can't buy those houses. You can't buy those apartment complexes. We don't have those levers in our government right now to do that. And so we have to be more proactive as a government, as a community, working with our faith partners, our other nonprofit partners, to either match those developers or do our own investments. If y'all saw the other, maybe about a year ago, Gwinnett County bought the Gwinnett Place Mall. They bought it for $23 million. And half of that mall is parking lot. So what they said is, well, if the government controls this piece of land that has a lot of redevelopment potential, we get to pick the developers, and we get to say what you are bringing here is going to be in the interest of not just the community that lives around it, but for the taxpayers as a whole. And so Gwinnett County is going to make back that investment by partnering with developers, but they're going to put those stipulations in place permanently, forever. And that's the kind of opportunity I think we have in DeKalb, because we've actually never done that. At one point, the South DeKalb Mall was up for sale, and there was a bid, there was an auction, and I think it was like 19 million, maybe something about that. Anybody got $19 million?
DeKalb County government does.
DeKalb County government does.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to be thinking about that as we move forward.
As we close out, how do we address the food insecurity, the health insecurity? Right now, you have the largest mental health facility in DeKalb County is the jail, because a lot of the physical and mental facilities have closed down. they're too far away. The air situation, air quality, DeKalb County is 94% worse air than in any other county in Georgia. So what are y'all's closing thoughts on these systemic issues going forward, and what can people do as far as reaching out to their commissioners and local leaders to kind of help us be able to address these issues?
So I think about Nehemiah. Nehemiah in the Old Testament is one of my favorite passages. It's one of my favorite books, period. Because Nehemiah heard about a problem in his native land and saw that his native land was in shambles. The walls, the protection for Jerusalem was in shambles. It was in ruins. And if you understand the history, it had been in ruins for a long time, maybe as long as 100+ years. It had been in ruins, and there had been efforts to rebuild the wall. Somehow, his leadership was able to galvanize people to come together in a way that previous efforts were unable or not sustainable to accomplish their goal. We have to have conversations and about the issues, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's food deserts, whether it's environmental justice. We have to have the conversations, but the conversations can't just stop at talk. We have to take the next step forward. See, we've learned, particularly in the African American community, we've learned how to say no. We know how to say no to bad. Civil rights movement, they knew how to say no to bad stuff that was happening to our community. But what doesn't get highlighted as often about the civil rights movement was at the same time that they were saying no, they were crafting their yes. At the same time that they were conducting the March on Washington, they were writing legislation, Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, to say this is what we want to happen in our community. So we have to learn how to say yes. And individually, our yes is important, but collectively, our yes is tremendous. Pastor Harris, y'all, if I had a pastor, he's my pastor. And I think I'm gonna make that official. I love this man. I love his heart for people. I love him, and he can preach too. I love his heart, and I love that his heart actually shows up in a tangible way. You can look at his commitment to Decatur, to South DeKalb County, and to Candler Road. See, a lot of preachers will go where the economics will look better for their church. Your average tither and giver would be here, so you go there because they'll pay for it. He said, no, we're going to make this the kind of space that we want to see. And I think in all of the topics that we've had here, y'all, I truly believe you have given such a dynamic blueprint for other pastors and other churches in our community that we can begin to duplicate what you're doing, that we can come together as well to produce our collective yes. See, you mentioned the jail. The jail not only is the biggest mental health hospital in DeKalb, it's actually the largest building in Central or South DeKalb County. Y'all hear what I said? It's the largest, it is the tallest building, it's the largest building in Central or South DeKalb. That's a shame, y'all. That shows that we don't have the type of economic development, economic opportunities and things like that. Churches, every corner got about 2 or 3 of them, are probably one of collectively the largest landowners that we can produce the kind of space that we want to see. Affordable housing, quality food opportunities, quality development as well, but it takes, and I'm sorry I'm taking so long, but it takes thinking differently than what we've traditionally done. See, pastors, when they feel called to preach, they go to seminary or Bible college to rightfully divide the word of truth, right? To be able to preach good. But when we take on the pastorate role, we have a commitment now to the community. But we were not trained to transform our community the way that it needs to be done. So when we're critical of pastors about what they are or not doing, we're asking them to do something that they were not equipped or trained to do. And so we got to come together, figure out how we can come together and utilize our assets. Our assets are land, our assets are building, our assets are people. Our assets are people. That if we come together, and when the private sector doesn't come into our community to do what's right, we say, don't worry about it, we'll create a public housing corporation. And that's nonprofit based, that doesn't have the same profit margin requirements that the stock market or the shareholders are going to command, and we will do it ourselves. Yep. Our yes can only come from ourselves. And I'm done.
So let me say this. As somebody who spends a lot of time on North McDonough Boulevard or Commerce Drive, we have to take this same energy over there to the Maloof building. And every month, am I correct? Every month they have, twice a month, I'm sorry, county commission meeting. Yep. And if we had this many people at the county commission meeting, I promise you, a lot of those statistics that we saw would change. The problem that we have is we vote, and then that's the end. We got to be more intentional, not just to vote, but to hold our elected officials accountable. Because he's right. The biggest medical facility in DeKalb County is the jail. Now, Georgia Regional is actually, what, 2 streets over. That's the only mental health facility in the entire state. It's the mental health hospital. And so when you start looking at being intentional about where we're putting our public dollars, our elected officials aren't putting our public dollars where the people want it to be. So we got to go have a conversation with them twice a month to remind them, you can get all the political donations from the big PACs and from the corporations, but that doesn't move votes. What moves votes is pouring back into your community, and they need to hear from their community. I never forget this. I was talking to a state legislator, and they said, if I get 3 emails, it's a crisis. 3. Y'all, I get more than 3 emails. So what we have to do is be intentional and more politically aware that it's not just about voting. It's about holding our elected officials accountable, because every problem we have just lifted up is either a state or local electable problem. It's about legislation. It's about pushing policy that addresses these issues. So I think after we get done, I appreciate the pastor for opening the doors. More churches need to open these doors. And Pastor May, former Commissioner May, is correct. Pastors weren't equipped to actually be civic engagers. They need to get in touch with the civic engagers so we can mobilize. And then we can make sure after we strategize, we implement the policy positions that we want. I'll give you one example. We say that Georgia has a healthcare problem, right? So let me tell you what the NAACP did. We entered a memorandum of understanding with Healthcare of Georgia to provide mobile health units to the entire state. We can fix our own problems, then have a conversation with our elected officials and say, okay, y'all have this unlimited tax budget. We don't have this tax budget, but we're fixing the problem. And so I think that's what we have to do. We have to go to the places where they're convened. Public comment. Listen, I heard this great plan that y'all had 10 years ago, but Candler Road still looks the same. This great plan for reinvestment for South DeKalb County. You know, I was raised in South DeKalb County. 40 years ago, it looked the same as it looks right now. Glenwood looks the exact same. And so what we have to do as the largest voting bloc in DeKalb County, which is South DeKalb, is to demand the investment in South DeKalb as it looks in North DeKalb. And so I think that's clear. I'll close with this. I know a lot of the people that are in this room. I know there's some activists in this room, some of them with very large platforms. It's time to call the black folks into the conversation and to mobilize, to not ask, not request, but to demand the change that we need. Because again, certain other parts of the county do not look like this. It's intentional. Push back on the developers and say, if you're going to come into this community and redevelop what the citizens want and make it affordable for the citizens.
I would like to add to what everyone has said and kind of give you all some practical things that you can do. So we will always have to be involved and engaged. The EPA, as well as our other environmental agencies at the federal level, have all kind of maps. They have all kind of data on their websites where you can put in your street address and find out the exact issue around air quality, around water, around environment, around income, around poverty for your particular area. You can then take that information and figure out what we know what works. There are communities that are doing this well, that are fixing their problems. We have the internet, we have it on our phones. Finding out what's going on well and being able to go to these meetings and go to our commissioners and go to our government agencies and say, this is specifically the issue we want to address, and this is how we want to address. Writing them, calling them, emailing them, showing up to meetings. The Georgia Public Service Commission, their meetings are on YouTube. You can go on YouTube and watch them and write them and respond to the decisions that they are making. Also, the other thing we're always going to have to do is that we are in a time where these corporate polluters are now using our language of justice and equity to justify the harms that they're doing to our community. So as we are educating ourselves on the issues in our community, we are going to have to shape the narrative and the language that needs to be used around these issues. And we're going to have to take ownership of our narrative and ownership of the stories of our communities so that we don't have external people and outside people telling our story for us.
Appreciate it, appreciate it.
Just as a final thought, a final comment, I think that we got to be able to connect the dots. We just had the largest environmental justice issue to hit our globe in the history of our globe, or at least since 1918 with the Spanish flu, and that was COVID. COVID was an environmental air quality issue. The whole globe was wearing masks. Look at who it impacted the most. Poor people, communities of color, marginalized and disenfranchised communities. Look at how widespread that impact was. It impacted food, it impacted housing, it impacted economic development, workforce development. Every area that we've been talking about was impacted because a bug got in the air. That's the message we have to take back to our communities. This does matter, right? Commissioner May was saying, Pastor May was saying earlier that a lot of our people don't think this is important. COVID is a prime example of how important it is when bad stuff gets in the air. It has a large trickle-down impact. I am very grateful to Commissioner Terry, and I want to just say this real clearly. He doesn't have to do this. He doesn't have to do this. The fact that he's doing it, and we're pretty hard on politicians, aren't we? But he's coming and he's saying, this is an issue. I have a voice to address this issue, and I'm using my voice for the purpose of seeing my community made better. That's what we need more of our commissioners, more of our leaders to do, more of our pastors to do, more of our leaders to do. So I commend you in that. Let's take this message back and connect the dots. Thank you.
Well, the church mothers have texted me and told me our time is coming up. So please get you a church fan. We have them in the front. Definitely use these. And I want to close, we're going to have Commissioner Terry close out, but I wanted to make sure I recognize the person that is a refugee that had a question about the language barrier and they want to engage. So can you address that as you close us out? And I want to thank each one of our panelists. This is just the beginning. This is just the start. This is going to continue with the churches and the pastors and Commissioner Terry. Take us away.
Thank you, Dwan, and thank you all for being here, and thank you to our panelists for everything that you individually do in your own roles and organizations and communities. And I am here in the DeKalb County government. I'm trying to represent us all here, but we want to work together. We have to work together. The intersectionality of what y'all do and what we do is so apparent. So as we move forward from this morning, know that this is continuing every single week, every single month. Board of Commission meetings twice a month. Attorney Griggs is exactly right. Public comment, always welcome public comment. You know, we definitely get more of the complaints at public comment, which is good because we want to make sure we're not missing anything. But also the encouragement to think big, to act swiftly, to think about those who may not be able to come and show up at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. So real quickly before I do a call to action and close us out, there was a question about language access. And many of y'all know that DeKalb County is the second most diverse county in Georgia. We are 17% foreign born. Gwinnett County is 25% foreign born, so they're the most diverse in that way. A lot of those folks who live in Gwinnett started out in DeKalb. We are all part of sort of one, big, metro area. And so we recognize that we are welcoming refugees from upwards of 10 different nationalities on a regular basis. There's 40 plus nationalities when you sort of combine all of the areas of the world that we're receiving and welcoming refugees. And so language is a big issue, cultural competency. I can say that we have made progress. We have a lot more to do when it comes to language access and cultural competency. That is a big thing. And there is another initiative called the Welcoming DeKalb Initiative that we've launched. We are doing a strategic plan, and we're looking at developing, and the proposal is to have an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. And just as I've mentioned in previous comments, we have had stories of refugees, new Americans, who have resettled here in DeKalb County, mostly in Clarkston, but the central DeKalb area, who have stories of climate change, of not that they were a climate refugee, but what's happening in their parts of the world 20 years ago, right now, and certainly into the future, is literally displacing millions of people, not just because of war, genocide, famine, or other political crises, but because the earth is changing, flooding, sea coast rising, droughts. These impacts are broad. They impact every part of the globe. We're doing our part in DeKalb County, and I think Georgia as a whole, to welcome refugees. And as we welcome them in, we want them to be part of our community and be a part of the solutions that we're seeking together. So it's a great question. Thank you for that. All right, so we have a nice little QR code for everyone because, one, we want to make sure that everyone knows that you have two commissioners. Again, the commissioners vote on the budget. The budget is how we spend your money, whether it's your water and sewer money, your sanitation money, your property taxes, your sales taxes, and all the other, CEO May knows this, all the other 50 other fees that are out there, in the government. We have to decide how to spend that money. So you have to have a good personal relationship with your commissioner. You want a personal relationship with your God, I know that, and your pastor, but with your two commissioners, and certainly, the CEO as well, but the commissioners, we're on the front lines on all of the issues that y'all have asked us to deal with, your hopes and dreams, the things you want to see improved in your community. The commissioners are where it's at. So I'm looking forward not only again to working with our incoming District 4 Commissioner, Shakira Johnson, and I know for District 3 and 7, those are elections happening this year. So let's work together. Let's make sure that all the commissioners are hearing about environmental justice. Okay, this is how we get things done. When folks show up at public comment, and I definitely get more than 3 emails, but when I get more than 3 emails, I know it's important. And when I see 10 people or 20 people or sometimes 50 people showing up at the Maloof building all saying we are speaking together, we want this issue addressed, it will give us a little kick, a little fire under our butts to make sure it happens. So we want to hear from you, we have to hear from you, and want to hear from you in a collective way. So here's all the email addresses. That QR code takes you to the sort of the website to find that out. The DeKalb Green New Deal after today, and what we've done at all of our conferences, is we want to hear from you. So at this point now and previous events, we're getting close to almost 1,000 DeKalb residents who have participated in this movement. And so we're growing it. And so as I think the speakers and the panelists have talked about today, we have to, a step that the county makes is the Environmental Justice Commission. That is the manifestation of giving the people a seat at the table. a seat in the direction that our county goes. So we welcome you and invite you to be involved in that. All right, thank y'all so much. Have a good rest of your day.